Welcome to this video tour of our Bible Lands trip, June of 1985. With me is our host, Buck Dozier, and Peggy Goldtrap, and they'll be making some comments on the things that we saw together on this trip.
This is this marvelous area that we visited where the Dead Sea Scrolls were first found. It's hard to believe as we look and used to our Middle Tennessee area with all its trees and greenery that we were in this stark area where rock was so prevalent. Remember, our guide explained to us the history of the Dead Sea Scrolls and what they meant to us as it emphasized that the Bible is real. This is the archaeological site of Jericho near Qumran. This is some of the remains of the area that was dug out by the archaeologist.
This is an Essene Village, and the Essenes were a group of people who abandoned their worldly, materialistic life in Jerusalem, and they went to the desert to become holy men and mostly preservers of the history and the laws of that particular time. And it was due to their efforts that the Dead Sea Scrolls, so-called, were ever preserved and found. It's a history of the early peoples, and it's also evidence of the complete book of Isaiah. And again, as Buck said, it just proves the validity of the Bible, and that this is a real book, real events, real people, so forth, that we're dealing with. Not just a matter of principle, but a matter of actual fact and evidence.
At this site also, we noticed the pretty blue sky, which I couldn't help be reminded of the whole time we were over there. I think there was not a cloud in the sky during our Holy Land tour.
Right. That's the remains of the walls of Jericho, and then in the background you'll see the Mount of Temptation.
Remember how they made rich, fertile ground out of desert? Here's our first sight of that particular area. It's so obvious to us as we travel through this land how modern some things were and how very ancient, yet some of the people's ways, houses, ways of living, that they retained these throughout their years.
That's modern Jericho in the background, as you can see the contrast. Also, wherever there's water in this land, it blooms, literally. You begin to understand the significance of verses in the Bible that refer to water and people fighting over wells and also fighting over shade. It becomes extremely important to you once you've stood out in about 95, 100-degree heat.
Here we are cooling off at the Jordan River. There are many people who are baptized, and you see the place that they walk out and can hold on to as they have baptismal services at this point. I think all of us were surprised of how small the Jordan River was in comparison to what perhaps our minds had always believed it to be as we read and heard about it in the Bible. As we were reminded, Levon told us that this river often is much larger than this when it overflows.
As name pointed out too, Jordan means where the Jordan refers to the river, where the Dan River flows. So actually in the beginning this was the Dan River, not the Jordan. And I was struck with the preciseness of the language. Everything has a meaning, a very specific meaning, unlike English where many words can mean many things according to the times or the particular slang expressions that are going around.
This area that we're looking at now is rich in biblical history. So many things happened during this river. So many references that have been made in Scripture all took place exactly where we were standing.
There are only 5 bridges going across the Jordan River, by the way, and all 5 are strategic to the Middle East situation today.
Here, if you remember, we saw this priest as he was digging with his assistant. here at Peter's house. They had been digging for some time in this area and had uncovered a great deal. As you remember, there was a number of things as we crossed over the Sea of Galilee into this particular area that was fascinating to all of us.
Again, the preciseness of the language. This is Capernaum. In the old language, it would be Kepher, village of Nahum. So you wanted to locate something, you'd be the Kepher Nahum. Or as Gideon was fond of saying, Kepher Nahum. Often we couldn't understand the differences because of the Hebrew and the English translation.
And as you remember the stories in the scripture where the Lord traveled from one city to another in Capernaum, to realize that we were only about 6 or 7 miles away by boat, and being able to see that beautiful city on the hillside as we approached it was something very startling. Here's a picture of the group. There's not much you can change here. That's the way we looked. In fact, we looked much better, I guess, there than we did about 6 or 7 days later. Wave at us, Charles. It's the only time you'll ever see Charles Williams not taking a picture in the whole trip.
One thing, being a person interested in contemporary history, I want to point out that at that particular site, we were approximately 3 miles from the Golan Heights. If you keep up with the news, the Golan Heights are in the papers every day, and they are the border around Lebanon, and Syria was close. All the nations that are so important to us politically are just a stone's throw from this very site.
Yes, it was that big ridge that we looked at across from our hotel, and if you watch the newscast regularly, you see that area bombed consistently, and I have pictures in my mind now of airplanes flying over and bombing those villages.
We were all getting pretty tired at this point and ready to head for our hotel. And of course, this being the first night out, we didn't know what to expect. And for all we knew, the hotel looked like the ruins. This was supposed to be St. Peter's house. Now, whether it was or not is anyone's guess, but they found some ancient fish hooks at the base of this excavation. And because Capernaum was known to be the site of Peter's home, they assumed that the fish hooks, and this was the site. And in good tradition, they've made it a holy spot.
I reevaluated the trip. I think this area around the Sea of Galilee was one of my favorite areas. I think it was probably the prettiest area that we went to in the area. I thought it was so beautiful, and the hillsides and the way that the sea was so quieting. Maybe I needed it at that time, but it was very quieting to me.
It was also in this area that Jesus delivered the Beatitudes, and there's a natural amphitheater area there that we didn't quite get photographed, but it lends itself so that you can stand on a mountaintop and hear all the way down to the sea.
Charles, walk to the camera for us. Now, do it again, Charles. We like that. Thank you.
Just $1, please.
Right. This is a view of Tiberias. In a few moments you will see that it's Haifa, but it's not really Haifa. It's only Haifa view of Tiberias.
Videographer arrow.
We stayed in the Golan Hotel, and the next morning we had a breakfast that was most unusual for Tennesseans. We had cucumbers and tomatoes and yogurt, and it really looked like a Shoney salad bar, to tell you the truth.
Here we are at Megiddo. Such an interesting part. I can well remember that, if for nothing else, how hot it was. And there's our great guide, Gideon. If you remember, Gideon never took us anywhere that he didn't pick up at least a leaf or a rock or something. He had a great interest in those type areas. And here he was explaining to us the great history behind this great place.
Again, for those who are interested in contemporary history or contemporary times, this supposedly would be the site of Armageddon, the Mount of Megiddo, Armageddon. In the Bible, it overlooked the Valley of Jezreel, and it was rather eerie to stand there on the site of this ruin and in the background hear jets constantly flying over this very low area. And I could not help but think, are these people moving toward this event? Are they moving toward some cataclysmic time? Or is it something that, again, is just a matter of figurative language? Let's question it. I was making the point and making the question in my own mind because our guides seem to think it was a real event. And if in their mind they think it's a real event, they'll almost inevitably force nations into such a battle. George, why don't you explain that one? That's one fascinating to me.
Well, the silo's designed so one man can go down while another man comes up. They couldn't possibly pass each other because the little passageways are so narrow. By the way, this is also where they stoned folks. They'd put them in the bottom of this grain silo, and then they couldn't get out. They'd throw rocks at them. And I'm sure it was a very unpleasant death. You might remember Stephen died this way.
Buck, tell them about the water tunnel that's coming up.
Oh, the great water system that being able to get water up, because often their enemies would blockade them in for days and months, and they were able to produce systems bringing water through caves and being able to store it. When I thought about how they engineered stuff back during those times, and we think we're such whizzes and wizards nowadays with our engineering, these people without any of our modern tools or engineering feats were able to accomplish great things.
215 feet down to the spring, and the spring was technically outside the walls of the city, but they boarded up or closed the entrance to the spring on the outside, and the only entrance was through the city walls. And in the event of attack, the enemy would not be able to find the spring, find their water outlet, and hence force the people to surrender. It was beautiful, magnificent engineering. Even as late as World War I, this site was used by generals defending these very strategic Middle Eastern positions. This is not Tiberias.
No, this is Haifa, and I thought, again, this is one of the most beautiful settings and scenes that we had as we rode the buses up to our particular area. This is where our fleet is often moored when they're in this particular area, and none of them were in there. I'd love to have seen our U.S. fleet in there.
This is also taken from Mount Carmel, and of course, if you remember the Old Testament history, this is where Elijah sort of snubbed his nose at the whole pagan world.
Very modern city, very new city in a sense. And there's a good example of the floor arrangements that we often saw along the way. Such a barren land, yet it had such great moments of beauty. This is the great city that the Crusaders built. So we go back to the history of why the Crusaders came over to rid this particular land and save it in behalf of Christianity. They built great cathedrals and built great forts along the way.
Had a great photographer.
According to one of the guidebooks I bought, this is the place where Peter converted Cornelius, and Paul was in prison, and Paul made his defense before Agrippa. I mean, I don't remember getting and pointing those things out. And
No, I don't think you did.
I don't know if I'm mixed up on the book. It makes a good story, folks. The Romans were great engineers.
Notice how thick the walls are. They make good fortresses today during the wartime.
There's an aqueduct.
Yes, in fact, that aqueduct that we happen to see is a picture on one of our publications recently, and my son noticed it immediately after seeing it. It's amazing that we went so far back in history. We're just fixing to celebrate our 209th birthday in this country, and when you think that we were talking about thousands of years compared to just 200 years of our country, it's really amazing how young we are.
As Gideon pointed out, anything under 500 years of age is considered too contemporary to bother with. It has to be at least 500 or more before they'll consider it significant. They also speak of past times as if it was yesterday. That fascinated me. They speak of something as, say, as short a time ago as 70 A.D. This was here. And like I said, in our frame of reference of 200 plus years of history, this, we speak of something in 1785 as being way back, long time ago.
Gideon was so patient with us to explain things to us, and did more than, it didn't seem quite to be a job for him. He looked like he really, really enjoyed it. Here was our chance to cool off a little bit and enjoy some of that great Mediterranean Sea.
There's a little dance on the rocks coming up here. Watch this fella. It's a really unique little step he's got here. There he goes.
Just like his daddy. Mediterranean Sea has always fascinated me. There's so much history in the world that took place in all the countries, even in Italy and Turkey, and you just can't study history without studying the Mediterranean Sea. I noticed a lot of people didn't want to leave. I think you really got attached to the water.
I think it brought out the old Tennessee blood in us. That's what it was. Take your shoes off and get them cool.
That's right. Unusual shot of Charles Williams taking a picture.
He sleeps with the camera, so we're not certain about this. It's been rumored.
He does invest in Kodak film.
Gideon said if you fly over this area, that you can see even more of the old city. What we saw is just a minute part of it. From the air, it's beautiful. Part of the fortress, right?
You think of being a soldier in that hot environment with all the armor and material that you would have on. It's a wonder that more of them didn't die than did. I forgot what Gideon said that plant was, but he told us.
The cactus.
One of them spiny things.
Texas cactus.
That was always a dry moat, he said, that it was not filled with water like the ones we envision in English castles. But at least it provided a defense against intruders.
As you watch these pictures and show them to your friend, I'm sure you'll have many memories of descriptions and things that you saw as you go through this. Well, here comes our bus. This is where we couldn't find George, but George was waiting on us.
We had an excellent driver named Otto, or we called him that. I think his name was something else, but we ended up calling him Otto.
Well, Otto, compared to our driver we had in Egypt, was a great blessing.
In a few moments, you'll see a group here that was from Texas, from Baptist Church, I believe, somewhere in Texas. And they had a video camera with them and had been taking pictures and had, this is them here. Their camera had gotten damaged somehow and or wasn't working, and so they asked me to get some shots for them. And so the group that you'll see here in a moment that you don't recognize is that group. But we were pleased to be able to take some pictures for them and forward them to them.
I was especially interested in the theater and especially in the acoustics because some of us speak so much and we have so much problem in so many of our, quote, modern buildings with acoustics and being heard. And yet these people did such a marvelous job. The wind blew in from the ocean and they placed it in such a way that wasn't even an aid to the voices of the people who performed here. You also remember here that this is where we had a short devotional and we sang some songs here.
pieces of modern work that you see there are not left over from ancient Roman times, but they're contemporary effects put up by local people, and concerts are performed on that stage in the summer. It's a very, very excellent stage. As Buck pointed out, the acoustics are superb for orchestra concerts and vocal concerts. Scene of Baptist preacher being converted, obviously. No, he's changed his mind.
And all of us, while we were enjoying all these sights and getting the description from my guide, George Goldtrap, was wagging that camera and tripod around and often didn't get the description. Peg had to write a lot of it down so he could catch up later. So we really appreciate what he did in getting these shots so we can be reminded of where we've been. Again, this is the Baptist group from Texas. And there we are in our glory.
We sang here, by the way, and the Texas group thought we were a trained chorus. They wanted to know where we sang regularly. I didn't know we sounded that good, but evidently we did.
Here's that marvelous view as Gideon allowed us to go in the back way, you might say, to Jerusalem, and that beautiful view. I think Levon said it was the first time he'd ever taken that particular road in, and only a guide like Gideon would offer us that. We were able to get out of our bus and go stand on those huge rocks as we looked in to the great city.
Every time you see a site like that, you can't help but thinking about Bible verses like cities set on a hill and the lights from the city being important. And also, I can make peoples out of rocks. And everywhere you turn in Israel, there's a rock of some size, small, large, indifferent, and some like almost mountains themselves. And yet God is in control of even those rocks, and he can tear them down or make people or nations or anything at his choice and desire. That's the dungeon. Buck, you ever felt like you lived in a dungeon?
Nothing like that, I'll tell you. It's kind of eerie as well as frightening, that was used back in those days.
There are many things that they aren't certain that the exact location and it's the exact thing that they've unearthed. But here's one example of the old road that was in Jerusalem, and they know for certain that was the old road, and those were actually the stones in that road. That's supposed to be the place where Christ ascended. And probably your guess is as good as mine.
Of course, a lot of this is tradition, and a lot of people have put up monuments. But we do know that it did happen. Whether it happened at this spot or not, it's something interesting anyway.
It at least gives you a visual, and that's what's significant. Uh-oh. Would they walk a mile for a camel?
Oh, my goodness. Look like they've been riding for years, doesn't it?
Maybe that's the humpback of Notre Dame.
In case anybody wants to know which one is the camel, that's the brown one on the bottom, not the one with the blue shirt with the white hat.
There goes Charles again. Uh-oh. Camel got tired.
I don't think Don Latham has anything like that in Atlanta.
Well,
Jason has a colt, now he's on a camel.
Will the real camel please stand up? How much was a camel ride, do you remember?
$1.
It's amazing a teenager would get on something without wheels on it, isn't it?
Weren't we on the Mount of Olives?
We were overlooking the city there. There's a beautiful shot.
That's the Jewish cemetery there, those little, the white area.
But do you know why all the Jews are not buried there? Because they're not all dead.
Oh, that's so funny. No, that's the Kidron Valley. A Jewish cemetery is kind of interesting because they can have the land for 25 years. And I don't know what they do with them after that. And they cannot be buried one on top of the other. They have to have their own parcel of land.
Everything was made out of stone. We didn't see any brick or anything like that. I think one of my favorite spots was the Garden of Gethsemane.
and the olive trees that were there, and how Gideon explained that an olive tree never dies. I thought that was rather interesting.
And we need to be reminded a lot of this water, again, comes from underground springs.
Again, you have a visual. You can imagine Christ being in this spot, looking out toward the beautiful gate.
Well, premillennial doctrine says that when Christ comes again, he's going to break through this gate into the city of Jerusalem.
You know, I always wish that we could have gone to see the model. You know, we saw that great model that man had made. Wish we could have seen that first and then had our tour. We'd have had a better visual of the city, I think.
This is a typical shepherd's field. It's still actively used by shepherds and by farmers. And this is the type of field that perhaps the shepherds would have been in when the angel announced the birth of Jesus.
Some of us, when we were watching that particular scene, noticed the Israeli fighters above us who were dropping something out, and we couldn't figure out what they were. They have anti-rockets that they shoot up at the airplanes that fly to heat in the exhaust. And the Israelis have devised a method of dropping these heat seekers that distract the missiles that are coming from the ground. And they were practicing that when we were reading and watching that Shepherd's Field area.
I was impressed with every time we would come to something, Gideon would point out not just the geographical nature of the place and the plants and so on, but he wanted to read every available verse of Scripture that applied to that particular location. And we just had a good shot of him looking up passages of Scripture. Here's one of the most fascinating things we saw on the whole trip.
And I think we saw it about 3 or 4 times, some of us, but it was always fascinating and different each time we had it. Notice the difference that the women are on one side and the men are on the other. We were privileged to be there during some holiday periods where we saw perhaps a little more.
The boys are going through their bar mitzvah, and they're coming of age, according to the Jewish custom. And it's rather strange to see, you see this Orthodox man with a black hat and a long outfit, and you see someone else standing there that's just simply covered, and another person's running a video camera while they're performing this ancient ceremony in front of a sacred wall. It's a land of contrast, truly and truly. Gideon pointed out, by the way, gentlemen, that there's no real custom for the women to be separated.
You mean there's no law? There is a custom.
Just makes common sense to you, doesn't
That's
it?
right.
Didn't surprise me a bit.
At one point in their history, this was the closest they could get to the old city because of the separation of nations. And since the 67 war, they can now get into the other parts of the city, so it's no longer called the Wailing Wall, it's just called the Western Wall. These are homes built on top of ruins, built on top of walls, and underneath all this will be passageways with bazaars and shops and restaurants.
Let me explain, by the way, that the little flickering you see occasionally is unavoidable. The camera had an automatic iris, and when we would go from shade to sunlight and back, the camera didn't know what to do. It couldn't make up its mind, so that's the consequence of the flickering.
It's amazing you can face west and see all this ancient area and ruins, and then turn right around, you see what's being built in a modern sense.
Contrast is the key. Like I said, when we first arrived, we went to Jordan and went to a beautiful, beautiful hotel that looked like one of our fine hotels in Nashville or Atlanta or Memphis. And then the next day we crossed the border and were surrounded by soldiers and tanks and burned out shells of equipment, all reminders that there's indeed a war being fought here at this very moment. It may not be declared, but it's a war of tradition, it's a war of culture, it's a war of religious hatred, one that really needs to end.
You noticed a few minutes ago, and especially when we were shot, you noticed all the pieces of paper stuck in the wall of the prayers that have been offered to so many. You know, Don Latham, I guess borrowed would be the word, a couple of the prayers, and we looked at them. Some of our men prayed at the wall themselves, not for the same reasons perhaps that others did, but for their own prayers, and found it a very memorable and moving experience.
By the way, even going to this sacred and holy place for the Jewish people, and certainly significant for all Bible believers, we still had to go through a stringent security check. Everything. Gideon also pointed out one sad reminder to me that everywhere there's a group of children, like if you want to take a class trip or whenever I see children, I think about this. With any group, there must be a military escort because they've had so many problems with the children being assassinated that everywhere you must have a soldier.
Here's a man selling prayer books or renting them, I can't think which, and everywhere we looked in this sacred place, there were men doing business. And I was reminded that that's one of the things that irritated Jesus so much, and he finally got enough of it, you recall, and ran him out of the temple. That custom hasn't changed. They're still trying to sell everything from chewing gum to automobiles everywhere you go.
There's a military man. Again, everywhere you turn, there's the military. In fact, it's required. Service is required of men and women. If a boy drops out of school in the 9th grade, he immediately goes to the Army. Pay attention to that, teens.
But now that military man had no weapon. They were not allowed to carry weapons down to the wall, at that point. Now here's something that really fascinated me. Here's an ancient ceremony. There's a Torah, the fellow saying his prayers, and all of this ancient tradition being practiced, and 10 feet away was a man with a 1985 Japanese television camera recording all of it. And no doubt would be perfectly willing to sell you a copy.
On the little boy's head.
Yeah, a little box. He has a little box with the scriptures written down, and they're on his forehead because the tradition says the scriptures are to go before you. So in order to keep them before him, they're taped to his forehead. Interpret for us, Buck, what this man's saying.
Well, I wanted to, but the sound is so low I'm not able to read his lips. Or read through his beard, maybe.
Afterwards, their family members will be watching this at a distance, and as soon as the last word is said, they shout and they do a desert yodel is the only thing I can think of. It's a very high-pitched, rapid sound that they make with in their lower throat. And they've brought pop bottles and cakes and things of that sort, and they have a family festival as soon as the last point is made.
It was at this point that I was sorry I did not carry sound facilities with this camera. Most of this is just scenery, and I thought, well, I wouldn't need sound, but the sound around this wall was very unique.
I think all of us can hear the sounds of those praying, and I guess if you want to call it a whale, that would be proper to call it that.
Also, the people who are close to the wall, I don't know whether we have it on this scene or not, but they get into a rocking motion. It's almost like a dance, and we asked Gideon why they did this, and we thought it might be part of ceremony, and he said no, it's simply because when you stand for a long period of time, your legs have a tendency to cramp and circulation is retarded, and so this is just a way of keeping your blood pressure and heart rate up and keeping yourself from fainting, really.
As you remembered, you had to have your head covered when you went into the wall area. He was talking about security a few minutes ago. I thought the security was unusual, and I can understand it, but I also noticed that it was they were not checking as thoroughly as some areas, though.
Change religions here.
This man is not examining his carpet. Tell him what he's doing.
He was praying, and I think he got a little bit irritated at the fact that I was going to photograph him.
I think we all were there, and I think that's where we started our conversation. I think he got a little irritated, all of us. Perhaps we didn't intrude on him a little bit.
This is the famous Golden Dome. It's a holy place for the Muslims. According to their tradition, this is the point at which, help me. No, that's in Jewish tradition. Abraham, this is Mount Moriah. Abraham offered Isaac on this spot.
Yeah.
But this is where their
Muhammad.
holy man, Muhammad,
Yeah.
ascended into heaven. And it's sort of strange to me that Jesus and Muhammad would ascend on relatively the same spot.
And while many of you were going inside, some of us were watching your shoes and bags. And
Whoops.
Get out of the way, Lon. The ladies with the things on their heads were peddlers, and if you'll notice, a guard will soon tell them to get out of the area. They were not supposed to be peddling there, and he quickly comes up and says to them in very very certain language, do not stay in this area, and they didn't like the fact they were being made to move very much.
One thing I think is Buck said that he and Ed were watching the luggage and watching our shoes and things. In typical American tradition, we were leery-eyed at everyone passing by. And yet, according to the Muslim tradition, if someone stole, they would be severely and sorely punished, like they would be maimed for life, or their life would be taken. And we were told that we were totally safe in a Muslim territory. Again, the land of contrast. It's the Muslim sect that is holding hostages at this very moment. They will take hostages and they will kill, but if they steal themselves, their hand is cut off. Imagine the contrast.
Well, we didn't feel totally safe there because we felt like we were often being distracted for somebody to be able to get to your billfolds.
But still, they would, had they been caught by those of the strict religious order, they would have been punished.
Yes, they would.
Immediately.
They would have.
As Naim pointed out to us, there is no capital punishment, and there are no long prison terms in Jordan. This is in a little garden at the Pool of Bethesda. It was a beautiful, beautiful spot. And we took a moment to read the scriptures and to relax and to think on the fact that this is the land and these are the spots where Jesus walked.
I was impressed with how much Gideon knew Scripture.
He always checked it, too. He was always...
Likewise, Buck, on the last leg of our trip when we went to Jericho, we were very impressed with the Scripture that was a part of the knowledge of Nahum, our Jordanian guide. He was an architect by profession, but he knew the Scripture. This is probably the best shot we have of Gideon, our Israeli guide.
Again, I can't help but think of contemporary history because Gideon, as a member of the Israeli army, is on subject and immediate call. And should situations develop, this nice, kind guide that we have and love so much would be on the front line in imminent danger.
He told me of a number of battles that he was in, and he was in the Six-Day War, and he felt deeply about a lot of that. We didn't lack for cameras on our trip, for sure.
This is the famous Pool of Bethesda, and it's in which the man had been at the door of this pool for something like 38 years and had not been able to get down to it because no man would help him. And according to tradition, when the angel disturbed the water, the first person in the water after that point would be healed of whatever malady they had. And as someone said, why couldn't the man get down? Well, now you'll see why the man could not get down to the pool.
We have a shot here in a moment of the area where the troubled waters supposedly were, and you'll see that the walls on either side of the pool are somewhere between 18 and 25 feet high. The little shallow things here were watering troughs for the animals. They had the pools fixed so that water came in at different levels for different usage, and then at various levels the animals could get water. But about the last shot in this sequence is the one that shows the depth of the pool, and you can see why the man had trouble getting to the water.
Well, the depth really surprised me. I had no idea, not even in my mind, of reading that a pool would be that deep.
Still the same thing. Of course, you're talking about excavations. You're on land that's much, much higher than it was at that time, but still, it was a difficult task, and it was one of Jesus' more prominent, and to me, always been one of his more compassionate.
Yes.
It's true that this was excavated, but they pointed out that this particular pool was low, even in its natural state.
And it had 5 porches. They've proven that in the excavation. It had the 5 entrances, just like the Bible says.
As we looked at this land, I remarked a number of times what excellent shape the Lord must have been in, and all the people that lived in this town. They walked everywhere, and nothing was flat generally, so they must have been in tremendous shape.
Now you can see the pool.
That's another reason every Christian should go, because you have no visual image of what this country is like. It's like in the story with the Good Samaritan when he talks, a man went from Jerusalem to Jericho and he was set upon by thieves. And you think, well, didn't the man see, and wasn't he watching out for himself? And, this is in our frame of reference. But when you see those mountains and narrow passageways and steep, steep hillsides and caves everywhere, you can begin to appreciate the story.
This is the hill of Golgotha. I thought this area carried a great deal of credibility. It did seem to me to be more realistic, that the things that we traditionally think happened really did happen here. I cannot get over, though, that is the spot of that bus terminal down at the bottom. With all of that noise, and I've thought about that so much, I wish they would have preserved a little more, if dignity is the word, in this particular time. this is supposed to be the tomb of our Lord. And again, for some reason, all that we were told and the sightings and the different areas of geography, it seemed to have some credibility, more than many other areas that we saw, I think.
One thing, they said this point was about 15 feet below the present terrain, and it had been excavated, and this area had been found, and etc. And I thought about the reference in the Bible where Moses was told to take off his shoes, that the ground in which he stood was holy ground. And I thought, literally, everywhere you turn in this country, you could be on holy ground. At any point, 15, 30 feet down, could be some remarkable artifact of biblical history.
I think George's shot there, looking through the flowers down to the tomb, was a gorgeous shot. I know some of you got some still shots of that same particular area.
Now, this is where we left our group, and we're in Jordan now. And we stopped at a roadside fruit stand and bought some apricots fresh from the tree, and they were wonderful. And Naeem said we could eat them, and eat we did.
And some went to Egypt.
Well, I wondered where that was. I thought I must have been asleep on the bus.
Well, this was, for those of us who made this leg of the trip, Buck, this was a highlight. Jericho is one of the best preserved cities in Jordan. And as you can see, the modern crane, they're continuing to work on it. Although they've run out of money, they've stopped temporarily, but they'll do some more eventually. But everywhere there are people, there are also merchants. And little boys selling chewing gum. And as Naeem pointed out to us, if you buy chewing gum from this little boy at the entrance, you must bear in mind he has 14 brothers, and they'll all be at the other end when you get there. The well was one of the first things we saw at Jericho as we went in, and we're looking down into it. And here's Naeem, our Jordanian guide. And in addition to being a good guide and an architect, he was very funny. And he would tell us all the historical things, and then when we get back on the bus, he'd have us relax by telling us something funny. And so the kids really enjoyed having him. And one of the things that we liked about him was that not only could he tell funny stories, he could be the recipient of funny stories. We had some fun with him as well.
Jericho was a major city of its time, and it's one of the cities of the Decapolis, the 10 major cities along the King's Highway. And any traveling that you did at that time would bring you through this city. And what we're looking at primarily are Roman ruins, and some of these are on top of Greek ruins. And no telling what else is down below if they keep on digging, or it may be vice versa. At this point, we were extremely hot, and we were extremely hungry. There's a very beautiful tourist rest area there. We had lunch about an hour from this point. This is the forum, the point at which all the roads in the city would intersect.
Little boy here selling chewing gum, and I began to photograph him. And then when he realized that I was watching him, he decided that he didn't want to be watched, and so he turned his head and walked the other way. But he was a very cute youngster, and we enjoyed seeing him. I asked the Jordanians why, I asked Naeem, our Jordanian guide, why it seemed that the Jordanians had done such a much better job of preserving their areas than the Israelis. And he said, well, the Jordanians have to fight for tourists. We want them and we welcome them, but we have to accommodate them. He said the Israelis, on the other hand, know they have something that everybody's going to want to see no matter what, so they don't bother to clean it up. They just continue to sell tickets.
These are the ruins of a chapel on the hilltop, and everywhere you look, of course, are ruins. And in a few moments, you'll see some little brown boxes, and you'll think, well, perhaps that's where the construction workers stay, but it's not. Those were stalls set up for vendors. And Jericho, at that point, see right there are some stalls set up for vendors, just brown square boxes. At this particular point, Jericho was being prepared for an annual choral festival. Groups from all over the world literally converge on Jericho at this particular time of the year, and day and night for several days. You can hear the beautiful, beautiful sounds of mixed vocal groups coming from this amphitheater. We're about to walk into the amphitheater, which was, talking about the acoustics, you could stand on the stage at the base and whisper, and people on the top could hear you clearly.
It's a beautiful area. I'm sorry those of us who went on to Egypt didn't get to see that area. Of course, at this time, we were risking our life trying to get from the airport to the hotel with our Muhammad Andretti driver that we had. I've never had an experience like that in my life.
There's a youngster on top.
Look where this little boy's sitting.
Naeem pointed out that the people never spoke to the audience. They actually spoke to the openings. And because you were speaking to the openings, they acted sort of in a megaphone expanding sense. Now they're at the base of this. In a few moments you're going to see a scene and it looks like a base of a theatrical stage. And portholes on the side. And what they would do at certain times, they would close the opening, flood this area with water, and they would have sea battles. And they would have plays and things that related to famous sea battles.
It's amazing.
Now see the center door there, how high that wall is. In a few moments, one of our oldest guests on this trip walked across the top of that wall so he could have his picture taken. Here's our little peddler again. Look where he's sitting. About 40 feet in the air there.
And all of that's real. That's not
That's right.
redone. That's actually the ruins.
Naim, by the way, wanted Jason to go up on the top so he could demonstrate the acoustics. And Jason would go up 3 or 4 steps, and Naim kept saying higher and higher, and Jason didn't want to go higher. And we finally got somebody. I think Jason finally agreed to go, but Naim had to just practically, there he is now, see, about the 3rd level. Naim kept saying, keep going, keep going. Here's our fellow up on top of the door now. He wanted his wife to be sure and take his picture up there. Yeah, Mr. Moshe. I don't know how he got up there, and I certainly don't know how he got down.
This is an overview of Jericho again. Much of the excavation is original. Some of these columns have been replaced, but for the most part, this is one of the most exciting sights on our whole trip. And you can't get the depth on something of this nature when you stand down on the city streets and you look up through the columns and realize that all this had to be constructed primarily by slave labor, and without many of the modern engineering devices we have, you can appreciate the architectural and engineering ability that the Romans had.
There's the modern city now on the other side of the valley.
See the vendor stalls?
It's marvelously preserved compared to some things we saw, isn't it?
That was an aqueduct on top. The flat pieces of stone on top of the columns was an aqueduct system, and the houses in that city had tap water.
What's the population of that area now? Doesn't look like it's too heavily populated.
The modern city was
About like Gallatin.
about like a small Middle Tennessee town, a West Texas town. I don't know what the population of the
About like Atlanta.
yeah. I don't know what the population of the old city was.
In the early days.
There's Katie. Katie was our youngest tour member.
And that's when Katie was feeling good. I remember a day when Katie wasn't feeling
yes.
good.
By the way, Naim at one time taught Bible, the first 5 books of the Bible, at a college in Kentucky. And he has memorized the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And if you started a verse, he'll say, doesn't it say, and now?
That was sort of a promenade. Now we're looking through some old pottery here.
Here we come up the hill, hot and tired.
This was about a 90-minute walk on probably was one of the 2 hottest days of the trip. Naim didn't stress drinking water like Gideon did. Remember, Gideon, every time we get back on the bus, he said, everybody have a drink of cold water. And Naim was so accustomed to it, I suppose it didn't occur to him to do it. Now, Buck, notice these columns here. In a few moments, you'll see Naim take a pocket knife, slip it into the crack of one of these columns, and by wiggling the knife, cause the whole column to wobble. He said they would not fall because they were joined together with molten lead, and so they were stable.
Lead rod.
Lead rod. That was molten with lead, of course. And then they would, in an earthquake or in a high wind, they would wobble, but they would not fall. He demonstrated that to us.
By this time, he'd made so many jokes, we didn't believe it. He said, I'm going to move the column. We said, yeah, sure, Naim. The column is several feet tall, and he's going to convince us that he's going to move it. And he said, who believes me? And I think there may have been 1 or 2 brave souls who believed him at that point.
No, I made a comment somewhere along the trip. I wonder if 1,000 years from now, 1,500 years from now, will the Empire State Building be still
Yeah,
up?
yeah.
Did we make them out of the material that would stand what these things have stood? I doubt it.
In the first place, our technology and our times are changing so rapidly that you won't preserve things of this nature.
We really don't build for things to last that long.
Underneath this area was a sewer system, and they said that was as interesting as anything you're seeing topside. And various holes would be in the street so that the water from the homes and water from the just normal rainfall could drain into the sewer system.
Made that shot lying flat on my back. I kind of like that. Sunlight peeking through.
One thing, too, that Name pointed out was that the Turks were the last great raiders of that land. There we go. Explain it.
Well, he just put the pocket knife in there, and then watch him wiggle the knife in it, and the whole column will wobble.
Terry can't believe it.
I'm not sure I believe it.
If you put your hand in the cracks, you could feel the pressure changing in the cracks. Incredible.
Yeah, I put my fingers in between the columns, and I could feel the pressure of the column shifting on my hands.
Well, that completes our little review. We hope you've enjoyed it. And, Buck, we thank you and Peggy for joining us. If you'd like to have a copy of this tape for some other friends or to share with other areas, in just a few moments you're going to see the address on the screen where you can write and get them. I don't know at this stage exactly what the price will be, but if you'll call me, we'll have it worked out by that time. Thank you.